I really apologize. I also want to, of course, thank you for inviting me to attend. I feel terrible that I am letting you down, and so I'm sorry about that. And but I will make myself available. If I am not able to actually be there in person, I will make myself available on Skype or some other internet facility so that in the side meetings that you have, we can discuss things more one-on-one, and I can do it that way. So let me then also talk about why I think I was asked to talk at this conference. This is a conference on reality therapy. I am not a therapist, but I know that I was asked to talk at this conference because reality therapists became interested in my specialty, control theory as applied to understanding people, back in the 80s, and I know that one of your members in Slovenia was particularly interested in the theory that's now called perceptual control theory, which was developed by Bill Powers, and who passed away in 2013. And I guess I am considered an expert in that area. So, so that's why I'm here. And so all I'm going to talk about is perceptual control theory. I'll mention some things that I think are relevant to therapy at the end, but I am not a therapist. And another reason I was invited, of course, is because I wrote a book on perceptual control theory called Controlling People, and I wrote it with my co-author, Tim Carey, who is a real therapist. And so the book is both about perceptual control theory and how it's related to therapy, and Tim handled the therapeutic end. So, but I'm going to, in this talk, I'm going to emphasize just the control theory aspect of things. I'm going to talk about perceptual control theory because that's why I think I was asked to be here, and so whether you want to hear about it or not, that's what you're going to hear about. And I guess I also thought I'd mention a little bit of my history with perceptual control theory, which is called PCT. I'm trained as a regular research psychologist. I got my PhD in as a cognitive psychologist. I did research on perception of all things. So I was just a standard research psychologist, and I went off to teach college after I got my PhD, and I taught standard psychology. And when I went to teach college, while I was teaching, one of my colleagues at the college I was at was it turns out he was a dyed-in-the-wool Skinnerian. And this was at a time, Skinner was still alive at the time, so that tells you when I was started teaching. Skinner was very popular at that time. This is in the mid-70s, 1970s. And but anyway, my colleague, who became a very good friend of mine, was a dyed-in-the-wool Skinnerian, and Skinnerians believe that human behavior is controlled by the environment, and that we're all basically puppets being pulled by the strings of what happens to us. I didn't like that idea, and the alternative to Skinnerianism at the time was cognitive psychology, which was my field, and somehow I thought that cognitive psychology ruled out environmental determinism of behavior, that people, because everybody wants to think they're free, they have free will, and they are agents of their own world. So anyway, I got in debates with Norm, my friend, about this issue of whether people could be control, because that's what Skinner was arguing. In fact, he wrote a best-selling book at the time called Beyond Freedom and Dignity, which was which basically said, okay, psychology has figured out how people work. They work by being controlled by the environment, so let's stop worrying about whether people have freedom and all that. Let's start controlling them so that they're in good shape. So anyway, so we got in this debate, which was carried on as faculty lectures, alternating faculty lectures and things. And eventually that led me to think that I didn't really have that good of an argument against Skinnerianism. Cognitive psychology had a lot of nice things about it, but it didn't really provide what I thought were adequate tools. So that led me to a book that I saw while I was leaving the library right after I got my PhD, which was Bill Powers' book called Behavior, the Control of Perception, which was the book that described perceptual control theory. And so I eventually got interested and actually obsessed with perceptual control theory, started doing research in it. I went and I made a pilgrimage to Bill Powers' house. I published papers on it, and we became colleagues, and so I worked with Bill. I met Bill in about 1979, and I was working together with him since then. So that's how I got into perceptual control theory, and have been very deeply involved in it, because not only do I think it's a good theory, well, that's it. I think it's extraordinarily important. But it's also a very controversial theory, at least among scientific psychologists like my colleagues, because it's quite completely different than conventional psychological theories, and in fact, you don't find many perceptual control theorists in academia. And in fact, I left academia after I became obsessed and went into other pursuits. But anyway, so that's me. So anyway, after Bill passed away, I decided to. I have several books that contain collections of my research papers, which are all full of equations and crap and not real readable. So I wanted to write a book that might be something people could read and get a feel for without a lot of math and stuff. And so I wrote the book Controlling People, which has been translated into Slovenian. There's now a Slovenian translation. And the title of the Slovenian, apparently the title, Controlling People, which in English, that phrase, controlling people, is a double entendre. It means two different things, and which is what the book is about. The phrase controlling people in English refers to people who are controlling, right? So I don't know if you have that in Slovenia, but in English, there are people around who we think of as controlling kinds of people. So that's one thing that the term controlling people refers to. So the book could be about people who are controlling. But the term controlling people can also refer to the fact, the process of controlling other people. And so the book could be a handbook on how to manipulate people. So it could be about those two things. The Slovenian title, apparently they couldn't capture this for some reason in Slovenian or Croatian, so the translation is, are we controlled or in control? And so, which is kind of the issue of the book, and it was the issue that actually motivated me to get into perceptual control theory. Are we controlled? Are strings really pulled by the environment, things that are outside of us? Or are we in control of the world that we live in? And so that's what the book is about. It's about the question of whether we are controlled or whether we are in control. And it's actually, the book is about the fact that we are both. We are both in control and controlled. And both of those turn out to be aspects of our human nature. And so I'm going to try to show you how that... but this creates a paradox. And that's the subtitle of the book. How can we be... In order to be controlled, we have to be controllable. We have to be things that can be controlled. Okay? So how can we be both controllable and in control at the same time? Okay? And that paradox is illustrated by the cover art on the English edition. I think the cover art on your Slovenian edition is a little different. But what this is a segment, and what this shows is, I think this art captures the paradoxical idea of people being both controllable and in control. And so like this figure here is being, this fellow is being controlled by this other person, having his strings controlled, and oops, what happened? Sorry. Way over there. Okay, so I must have skipped this slide. Were we here? Okay, so human behavior can only be controlled if it is controllable, and humans can control behavior only if... that's what I'm doing. Maybe you should stop.
And now.
Okay, so people can be controlled if they are controllable, and people can control other people if they can be in control. Actually, this second point, and I should have mentioned this second point is a thing that never comes up, like when Skinner was talking about control of behavior. He said, people are controllable, and and I can control them. Skinner was saying that. Well, how can you control them? You're a person too, so you must be controllable, right? But you're saying you can also be in control. So Skinner was saying that, implicitly saying that he could control, that other people were controllable, and that he could control them. But because he was saying he could control them, he was saying, I'm also in control. But he's a person too, so he's controllable. So that brings us, and that's the paradox that's illustrated by this cover art. How can a person be both controllable and in control, like this fellow here, who could be B.F. Skinner himself? He's saying, I can control other people. See, I can pull their strings, but he's also a person, so he must be controllable also. So how can that both happen? It can't, if you look at this, it's like a visual image that shifts back and forth, a visual illusion. Okay, so that's the paradox. That's the paradox of human nature that the book Controlling People deals with. That it's a paradox illustrated by this picture on the cover. So each figure on the cover art of the English edition is both controllable and in control. And okay, so it turns out that control theory, perceptual control theory, solves this paradox. it shows that we can, in fact, be both in control and controllable at the same time, which I will demonstrate using my audience here. Okay, so in order to understand control theory and this whole theory, the first thing we have to understand is something that is rarely dealt with in psychology in general. Or, well, I won't say that right now. I'll just say what we have to first understand is what does it mean to control or to be controllable? What does it mean? What's control? I mean, when you hear the word, a lot of people think, oh, dictatorship and all that, which is true. Dictators control. But, as I say in the book, control also means, you know, a pitcher who can keep it in the zone, and, you know, a pitcher with good control. Control, as a word, has bad connotations often, but it also has good connotations. People like to be in control of their lives, of their relationships. Well, we'll see. Okay, so what is control? It turns out that control is this is the formal definition. It's a process of producing pre-selected results in a disturbance-prone world. And what that fancy definition really says is that control is what we typically think of as purposeful behavior. Control is just people achieving what they want, but also they achieve we achieve what we want in a world that doesn't always make that easy. We are making things that we want to have happen despite the fact that the world is often providing roadblocks in the way of that happening. Sometimes those roadblocks are not that obvious. So we are controlling whenever we are producing or trying to produce certain results, like lifting a book or moving a chair or whatever, or having a date or whatever you do. You are controlling whenever you are producing an intended result on purpose in a world that doesn't make that easy. And doing it in this, that's what that last thing means, in the context of changing circumstances, disturbances. Okay, so here's a little illustration of what control is. First of all, there are 4 components to the process of controlling that are observable in behavior. So what I'm going to talk about now is trying to teach you, and you won't learn this right away, but how to teach you to look at behavior as a process of control. And these are the 4 components of control. What's called a controlled variable, and now I'm going to use some symbolism, but don't get too blown away. We'll keep it down. This is the only ones we'll use. A controlled variable, which is called QI, the reference state for that variable, disturbances, and the outputs that keep the variable in its reference. Let me describe that in terms of a behavior that you probably did, or are doing right now, lifting a cup to your mouth to drink a drink of tea, like she's doing. Okay, so here is a behavior, drinking a cup of tea. That behavior turns out to be a control process. The controlled variable is the position of the cup. The controlled variable just means some variable in the world that can vary. The position of the cup is something that can vary, right? The reference state of that variable I guess we have to stop it again. Sorry. Okay, so here we are trying to look at an an example of a common behavior in terms of what's as a control process and what's involved. Okay, so what the controlled variable, which is called QI, is the position of a cup. It's a variable, and what control involves is keeping that variable in an intended pre-selected state, right? When you take a sip, the main intended state of that variable is having the cup at your lips to take a drink, right? The intended state of the variable is the reference state, okay, and that's called R star. And so the reference position of the variable, the cup position, is at your lips. Okay. The disturbances that affect that, the things that make it different, that affect how well you can get it to your lips, the main one is gravity. And gravity determines how much force you have to exert with your muscles to lift the cup to your lips, right? Okay. It turns out that getting the cup to your lips consistently, which is what we do, is a control process, because we keep getting the cup to your lips, and you don't put it over here, or throw it over your shoulder, or put it over your head. You always consistently get it to the reference state at your lips, despite the fact that the effect of gravity is varying each time. And you know why? Because the contents of the cup is going down. So it weighs a different amount each time. And that means if you used exactly the same lifting forces each time you took a sip, after about the second sip, you would be throwing it over your head, right? So what you're doing is producing this consistent result in the context of varying disturbances. The varying disturbances being the varying effects of gravity on that thing. Now that seems like a trivial example, but everything we are doing as we move about the world is a control process. We are adjusting outputs in terms of muscle forces and all kinds of things like that to produce these nice, consistent results that you see. I think you can get a sense of how amazingly skillfully we are controlling just our movements, but we're controlling many other things, as I'll show you, but how skillfully we're doing this controlling, so that basically controlling becomes invisible. It looks like we just behavior just pops out of us. We just lift a glass, or we open a book, or we call on the phone, call for a date, or whatever it is we do it with such grace and ease, usually, except when things go wrong, and then we have to go see a therapist. But our controlling is usually very skillful, because we are producing what we intend to produce, these reference states, by very skillfully manipulating our outputs, like our muscle movements, to get those reference states to happen. One way of seeing how incredibly wonderful that is what we're doing invisibly is if you look at robots that are designed. Now, robots have been designed to do some very clever things, but they don't do them like people yet. But regardless of the goodness or badness of that, the point is that they have trouble developing robots to produce behaviors like walking. Imagine how we walk on this changing terrain regularly, adjusting our position and our forces that we're exerting to keep ourselves completely easily balanced. We almost never trip, or stumble. And there is no robot that can do that. You've got robots that can walk, but they have to be, they're in limited environments that they can walk. They can't go on a hiking trail, after they've been walking down Hollywood Boulevard or something. They are limited in their ability to control. Okay, so anyway, so control is what we do. Behavior is control. I don't know if I want to spend too much time because I think I'm already going, but what I like to do when I teach this in class is have students look at examples of any kind of behavior that you can name and try to look at it in terms of these components of control. Like when you lift a book, what's the controlled variable? It's similar to lifting a cup of tea. It's to get the book in a position where you want to read it. What are the disturbances? Again, it's gravity. And what is the reference state at the right position? And what are the outputs? Again, it's muscle forces. Riding a bike, the controlled variable is your center of gravity relative to the bike, probably. The disturbances are, again, the forces of gravity that are differentially exerted depending on the slant of your bike. And the outputs that compensate for those disturbances are how you turn the wheel. It takes a while to learn how to do that, but when you learn how to ride a bike, it's like you're not doing anything. You're just turning the wheel just enough to keep your center of gravity right over. Driving a car, well, there's several controlled variables when you drive a car. You want to control the speed of the car, the position of the car relative to the other cars. You do it by hitting the gas or the brake. The disturbances are, how fast the other cars are going relative to you and things like that. You control for maintaining a relationship with a loved one, right? And so what is the variable involved? Well, there's lots of variables involved in relationships that you want to control, but one of them surely is how loving it is. Right? So how nice things feel, let's say, or how calm it is, or whatever. There are different aspects of a relationship that you want to control, and so you try to get those things. Those are variables. So the relationships can go from cold to hot, and in terms of lovingness, and so you have a reference for how loving you want it to be, because it can get too loving. But you have some reference for where you want that to be. You control it by doing various things, bringing flowers or bringing whatever. You do things to try to, and the disturbances are how the other person acts relative to you. So we're controlling all the time. Everything we do, every behavior you can name is, when you look at it, is in fact a case of controlling. So control is what it's about. Control is what we do. So control isn't a dirty word until you start trying to control other people, and we'll get to that maybe a little. That's when control is bad, especially when you're the other person being controlled. So I just want you to know that I don't think control is always a great thing, but control is just a phenomenon. It's a more technical word for purposeful behavior. We are purposeful creatures. That's all. Perceptual control theory is a theory that explains how we control. That's all. So control, our controlling, all the stuff we do, playing chess or video games, I guess now, everything we do is controlling, and perceptual control theory is just the explanation of how that's done. It's an explanation of purposeful behavior. I should point out that this isn't such a problem probably I know it's not a problem in the therapeutic community, because people who are trained as therapists take it for granted that people have are purposeful systems that are purposeful. But in scientific psychology, purpose is a dirty word. You will not find it in the index of any psychological textbook. The word purpose is scary to scientific psychologists because it sounds unscientific. Purpose is a problem. And that's why perceptual control theory has had a problem in conventional psychology. But anyway, perceptual control theory was developed by Bill Powers, William T. Powers, and described in his book, Behavior, the Control of Perception, which is the book I saw in the library as I was leaving after I got my PhD, but didn't read it, but the title got me. I don't know if it gets you, but if you were trained in conventional psychology in a psychology department and you're trained to be a research psychologist, the way you thought about things was perception controls what we do. It inputs our perceptions, and if anything, perception controls behavior. So when you walk through the library and see a book called Behavior, the Control of Perception, you pay attention. You say, what? And that's what I did, although I didn't have time at the time, right after I got out of, to do it, but so I came back to it, as I said. It was about 4 years after the book came out, in '74, and '78 is when I got back into, and read the book, and became obsessed with it. Control theory already existed. Powers didn't invent control theory. It already existed in engineering, and it's a big, scary field that's got a lot of mathematics in it, and it's and it's very mechanistic. And it's been applied in psychology ever since World War II. It was applied to understanding how. In the field I actually went into, called human factors engineering, it was applied to understanding how pilots can better control their airplanes and things like that. But it turns out that it was applied in the wrong way. It's possible to use theories incorrectly, and back in the day there, right after World War II, psychology was heavily steeped in behaviorism, and behaviorism says that inputs cause outputs, perception controls behavior. So control theory was used to explain how perception results in behavior, and they were using all these complex mathematics to look at these relationships between stimuli and responses, and they were able to do that for reasons that I now understand, but I won't go into. Just for now, what you can know is up until Bill Powers came along, control theory was existing in psychology, but they were doing the wrong thing with it. Powers was able to apply control theory correctly. Powers actually was trained. He was trained as a physicist of all things, and he learned about control systems because he was actually he was in the Navy in World War II, and in fact, a little known anecdote, he was on in the armada that was going over for the invasion of Japan. And he was going to be one of the people who set up the little lamps on the beach that would illuminate things for the invading army. And in other words, he was going to be a dead duck. And so and Bill was the most humane and wonderful person I've ever met. And he had very, very ambiguous feelings about the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs, but it saved his life. So that's the world. Anyway, so the Bill, after the war, and he had been trained in, he became very interested in behavior because he had his own post-war things to deal with. And he was able to apply control theory correctly, and the reason he was able to do that was because he was trained in physics, and he understood what I gave you a very abbreviated treatment of just now. He was able to understand that the things we see as behavior are not just things that pop out of you. We live in a physical world where we have to deal with these disturbances that are like varying effects of gravity on us and things like that. And he knew that when you just saw a person walking down the street, you weren't seeing just a person, that walking didn't just pop out of you. It had to be a control process. Something was going on. And so he knew that it had to be explained by control theory, and because he knew that behavior was control, he was able to apply the theory correctly. So I think, okay, so here's the theory. So this is why you might get scared by it, but this is a basic diagram of a control system, and I'll try to describe how this works. But I want to try to give in the book there are no diagrams, there's no math, there's no nothing, no symbols. I try to give a verbal description of how a control system works. But since we're talking about the theory, I'll go into a little more detail about it. The first thing to notice about this diagram is that the bottom half is called the environment. This is the aspect of behavior that we can see. This is, well, some of it. So what we certainly can see is the state of this controlled variable. So this is objectively observable. We can see that a person is keeping the cup coming to their lips. We can see that the person keeps taking steps without falling down. We see the things are being kept in reference states, and if we're a physicist, we often can see the invisible disturbances that would be having an effect on this if they weren't being compensated. So anyway, this is the world we can see, and it's basically what we're trying to explain. We're trying to explain. Whoop! I did it. We're trying to explain why these variables in the world, the variable aspects of our behavior, how they are able to be kept in these reference states. So this is the phenomenon we're trying to understand, is the fact that we have the variables are being controlled by people. All right, and so this above the line is a theory. This is the theory, but it's consistent with what we know about people. This is presumably what's going on when we lift a cup consistently to our mouth. The first thing we have here is an input function. This is your sense system that perceives the cup. You have to see the cup in order to control it. That's okay. So so this input function is your sensory systems that transforms this cup out here into P, which is a perceptual signal. A perceptual signal is literally just an afferent neural signal. We know that the nervous system is made out of afferent neurons and efferent neurons. Do you know that? Is that? Well, anyway, and they go into the central nervous system, and efferent come out, afferent go in. So this is a sensory signal, basically, an afferent signal. And now this is where we get more into theory. In theory, this perceptual signal, the perception of the cup, is compared to another neural signal that's called the reference signal. This turns out, this little R, this reference signal, is the whole big enchilada of this theory. This reference signal, which comes from higher parts of you, higher parts of the nervous system, is that's a specification for what the perception should be. It's this signal in you that's telling this perception to be at the lips. Okay, and what this is a synapse which implements a comparison process. It's really just subtracting the perceptual signal from the reference to see if there's a difference. Is there a difference between where the cup is and where I want it to be? That's all that is. This little box is just, that's all you have to do. It's comparing how where the cup is near where I want it to be. If it's, to the extent that it's not, to the extent that there is a difference, you get this thing called an error signal. That's the actual efferent signal that drives the muscles. Okay? And so the efferent signal is converted by this output function into actual forces on the world. Okay? Now, in the world, those forces have an effect on the very thing that you're perceiving. So there's a closed loop of functions here, and verbally I have to describe this closed loop in a sequence. But the fact is, the best way to think of this, because all these things are happening over time, what's actually happening in this closed loop is that the output is continuously being pushed in the right direction so that the perception is really always being kept right at the reference. You're always in a closed loop. This perception is being kept at the reference, and so there's always very little error in actuality. There's a little bit of error when you first pick up the cup, but very quickly, because of the closed loop aspect of things, the perception is brought to the reference. So what's happening here in this closed loop is a closed loop system here. But what's happening, in the way I think about it, is this reference signal is causing the perception to be where it wants it to be. This reference signal is just a fancy name for a want. This is what I want. This is what I'm getting. So the control model of how you behave is that this is all happening in you specify what you want to experience, and once you specified it, assuming you're a good controller, it happens. So I specify that I'm going to step forward and make that happen, and each thing that happens, each specification is almost immediately happening, at least in the time frame of the particular kind of perception that you're controlling. But that's the way to think about a closed loop control system that you are, is that you are controlling, you are making a perception match your want. And that's why his book is called Behavior, the Control of Perception, because what is happening in a control loop like this is that this loop is controlling that guy, the perception. So when we're looking at people behave, what you're actually seeing from the outside is people acting, doing these outputs, to keep their perceptions of the world where they want them. And they're the ones who are setting these wants. So the perceptual control theory looks at people, or shows that people are what we always thought they were, autonomous. You set your own goals. Nobody can set your own wants for you. You're the one who's doing that. However, because of the fact that some of the perceptions you want to control are, or all of them, are affected also by disturbances, you have to act in certain ways to correct for those disturbances. So what we also see people doing is acting to compensate for disturbances at the same time. So what we're seeing on behavior is both variables being kept in reference states, and we're seeing often how they are being done. And that's the demo I'll get to in a second. But so this slide is just an attempt to give a verbal rehash of what is shown in this diagram. So controlling, what people do, according to perceptual control theory, is a closed loop negative feedback process. The negative feedback just refers to the fact that when I act to reduce the error in this loop, when I produce outputs in response to the error, I am canceling the error. I am negatively affecting the error. So if there's error, it'll drive the output to do things to the perception that reduce the error in the first place. So the feedback effect of my actions on my perceptions is to make any error I'm having less. And what that results in is keeping that perception at the reference. So that's what negative feedback control is. Just a quick diversion. Positive feedback is what you see when a microphone goes louder and louder and eventually just stops, right? Because what's happening is you're talking into the microphone, which is being amplified out of the speaker. The speaker picks up that amplified output into the microphone again. The microphone continues to amplify it, so the feedback is keeping on making the error bigger. That's positive feedback. So it turns out, it's an interesting thing about control theory, positive feedback is bad, negative feedback is good. But anyway, so controlling is a closed loop negative feedback process. It acts, what this loop is doing is keeping a perception of what you want to have happen, the intended result, matching your own in your head specification for where you want it. These reference specifications are neural signals in your brain that you set. The reference specification in this model, by the way, is equivalent to the set point on that thermostat, on a thermostat. When you set the temperature of the room with that little knob there, you are setting the reference temperature that guy wants to feel. But in the thermostat, the reference is accessible to you. You can control what that thermostat wants. You can make it want 70 degrees or 60 degrees or whatnot. It doesn't have any choice. You determine what it wants. In people, you can't do that. The reference signals are inside your head. That's what autonomy means. Nobody can set those references. They can tell you what to want, but that's just an annoyance, right? You are the only thing that has control over what you want. So, conventional psychology, that means all of scientific psychology, not so much therapy, clinical psychology, conventional psychology really views the brain as a computer-like device that transforms what you get into what you do. All psychologies, behaviorism, cognitive, all psychology looks at the brain that way. It's an input-output device, which implies that ultimately perception is what controls what you do. Control theory views the brain as a provider of specifications for the way things should be, which is really, if you think about it, that's the way you are. You're not always conscious of that these specifications are existing, but that's what's happening, at least according to PCT, and it's consistent with experience, really. When you feel there's something you don't like, it's only because you have a reference for the way it should be. There's nothing intrinsically good or bad about anything out there of your experience. Okay? So if it seems like some things are intrinsically bad. I won't mention anything about our election, but some things just seem intrinsically bad. But they're not. They're only bad because they deviate from your reference for the way things should be. That's why there's so many people who think some of those things aren't bad. They have different references. It's exasperating, but that's the way it is. People have different little references and different specifications in their brain for the way things should be. Okay, so now, given that little thing, now I can show you how control theory explains how you can both be in control and controlled at the same time. And so I would like to have a volunteer from the audience come up. What's your name?
Casey.
Casey, okay. So, are we okay here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what I'd like you to do, I guess I could whisper this in your ear, but I'll just give it away. All I want you to do is follow my finger with your finger, okay? So this is it. This is the whole demonstration. Now, from one point of view, you could look at this as Casey keeping his finger aligned with mine, which is what he's doing. The movement of my finger is a disturbance to the perception of the relationship between our finger, right? So when I move my finger, he moves his finger in order to keep it aligned, right? So you are controlling the alignment of our fingers, right? And you're protecting that perception from the disturbance that is my finger movements, right? But you can also see this as me controlling you, right? Because I can make you write my name, right? So you don't know that you are being controlled in this way, but I can control you. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so I was able to control Casey's finger movement as long as Casey kept controlling the relationship between our fingers, right? And there's one more thing I should have said. Okay, so again, as long as you're controlling for that, I can control you. But how about just forgetting about keeping your finger in your mind? I can't control it anymore. I can't control your finger unless you control the relationship with my finger. In other words, I can't control you unless you're in control of something else. Great, thank you. So we are controllable to the extent that we are controlling things. I think the Buddhists kind of caught on to this. Your wanting makes you controllable, right? To the extent that you want stuff, you can be manipulated. That's what advertisers depend on. That's what a lot of things depend on. So, to the extent that people want to be nasty and control you, they can, to the extent that they can identify things you want, perceptions you want to control, and then they can become a disturbance to that thing, so that the only way you can get what you want is to act in opposition to my disturbance. And acting in opposition to my disturbance is what I want. Okay? I'll just say that another thing about people, that as far as controlling their behavior, people don't like to think of themselves as being controllable. And in fact, they're not. Obviously, we can't. The thing about people that makes us different than other animals, which we accept as being controllable. You can train dogs. We can't train cats, but you can train animals. You can control animals to a certain extent. The reason we're so much less controllable is because we are smart enough to be able to see when we're being controlled. And that's something that I think develops pretty early in the game. Kids can figure out when that's happening. People know when they're being jerked around, and they can take steps, or will take steps sometimes, to not be jerked around. Okay, the next thing is, in this theory, we are not just one big control system. The diagram of a control system makes it seem like we are, that all we do is control one thing, and we do it with one action. In fact, we are controlling a gazillion things at the same time. Most of them low-level things like our muscle tensions and our balance and things like that, but we're also controlling, like I'm controlling for getting through this talk, and I'm controlling for all kinds of very high-level things, while I'm controlling for my balance and what the words I'm saying and all these different things. So control theory, perceptual control theory, conceives of the nervous system as a hierarchy of control systems. So we are controlling different kinds of perceptions, many different, but we're controlling many different perceptions, but they are hierarchically related, from very simple ones like the intensity of light on our eyes, which is controlled by the size of our pupils, to things like our role in the world, what we want to be, the meaning of life stuff, very high level things. So we are a hierarchy of control systems, but I guess there is evidence that this is actually the way we work, and I have a sort of a fun demonstration to show a hierarchy of control systems. So let me have you up here again. Okay, now what I would like you to do is put your, let's see, how do I do it? Yes, put your hand face up and keep it straight out. And okay, so don't let me push it down. Okay, that's it. Okay, now what I'm going to do is, when I push down on your hand like that, that's a signal for you to move your hand down as quickly as possible. Okay, so here we go. Good. Okay, so what I'm showing is that my little push down, the signal, is a disturbance to your system that's keeping your arms straight out, right? So when I push down, the first thing you do is push up, right? But what I want you to do is treat that push as a signal to move your arm down. So I'm pushing your arm down as a signal, but your arm doesn't go down first. And so what's going on is there's a lower level system that's controlling your arm position. And when that lower level system is disturbed, it responds to my push. But when the higher level system that sees the push as a signal, then it moves the arm down. So that little hitch in your response is actually the response of a lower level control system. And it's impossible to get rid of it. But you can try. So that's what one little, so here, good. Okay. Pretty good, but it's a little bit. See? So
Yeah,
that's it. Good.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks. All right, so we are a hierarchy of control systems, and there's a lot of evidence that that's true. So this is a complicated diagram that illustrates that hierarchy. Here we have a whole bunch of input, comparator output systems, a whole lot of control systems. These are the control systems at the lowest level of your nervous system. These are the control systems like your tendon reflex system that's keeping, that's controlling the tension on your knee, so that so that you can keep your legs straight despite changes in the terrain and things like that. The next level up are the systems that set the references for that lower level system that are controlling perceptions that require these lower level systems to change, and so on up. Powers came up with some ideas based actually on introspection of what the different kinds of perceptions are that are controlled at each level. So that's what these names are here. So like the lowest level perceptions we control are just perceptions of how much of something there is, intensity. And then the next kind of perceptions are perceptions of combinations of intensities, like the taste of lemonade is a combination of the intensity of different chemicals in a liquid. Transitions are perceptions of movement, changes in the state of sensations. And configurations are patterns of, and so on up to, so it's more and more complicated perceptions that are controlled at each level, and there's a top to this hierarchy, at least currently, as far as we can tell. The highest level perceptions we control, the powers thought they were something called system concepts, which are our perceptions of how we get along in the world with other people, systems of who we are relative to our group. So, but the only reason I present this is to show you that it's these different levels of control systems that are apparently responsible for setting the references of the lower level system. So the question of where do our wants come from? From higher level wants. And where do those come from? So what's interesting though is then that there is a top to this hierarchy, and there's in the sense that there is a level of you at which you can't change your references anymore. It's the ultimate you. It's the end of your autonomy. And so, and it's those system concepts. It's the sense of yourself, whatever that is, that determines how you set all these what principles you'll defend, what programs of action you'll carry out. All those things are dependent on what you have developed as your system concepts. That's why it's so important to try to help people develop what would be good system concepts that would help them set references for other things that would be, so that they'd be nice to other people instead of the way they often are. But it's all happening within you. There's no way to get into this thing to make it any better. You are the one that changes your own light bulb, I'm afraid. Okay, so that's the model of how we work, of how people work. It's the And it explains how we are able to control our experiences. It explains why we are sometimes able to get people to do what we want, why it seems like we can control them, because if we can disturb things they care about, we can get them to... And there's a section in the book that explains how you can control other people. If that's what you're into, you can do it. And it's also a big part of the book to say that being oriented towards controlling other people is a problem. It's actually, that's kind of the theme of the book, is it's another paradox. Because we are control systems of this sort that have references for the way things should be, among the things we have specifications about the way things should be is how other people should be. You can't help it. There's no way to get around the fact that you want other people to be certain ways. If you can no more stop wanting such things than you can stop wanting to maintain your balance when you want. It's just part of things. And so that creates a problem, because when you do start acting to try to get people to be the way they should be according to your specifications, then it turns out you start to get, it's very likely you will get into a conflict, and that's what I'm going to talk about in a second. In other words, when control systems try to control other control systems, they just end up fighting. So, why do we lose control? Oh, okay, great. Why do we lose control? These are my 3 reasons why we lose control. Because being in control is what it's all about, and when we lose control, losing control means that we are having a mismatch between what we want and what we're perceiving. That creates error, and error hurts. And the chronic error hurts bad, and ultimately it shows up as psychosis, neurosis, and all those things. But anyway, one cause of loss of control is ignorance. This is actually, it's not so much loss of control. When you're developing, you have to learn to control. Control systems don't come in automatically. So that's why people get educated, get training. You have to learn to control things. And so to the extent that you are ignorant of how to do things, you will not be able to control them as well as you could. So one treatment for loss of control, if it's a loss of control due to a lack of skill, get educated or get trained. Another reason for loss of control is the one I'm familiar with because of my wife's situation, and that's insuperable disturbances. That is, things that happen that you just can't deal with. A hurricane hits, your neighborhood, your house is gone, and there you go. That's a huge difference between what you want to perceive and what should be. And insuperable means there's no thing you can do, at least immediately, to compensate for those kinds of disturbances. The death of a loved one. These create enormous error. Some of these can be treated, in a sense, by preparation. You build your house of bricks instead of straw. But otherwise, I actually did some work for FEMA, where they had a crisis counseling thing where after catastrophes, floods, and hurricanes, you go in and just talk to people. Time does heal these things sometimes, but it's tough. And the third kind of reason for loss of control is the one that I just alluded to, and that's conflict. When you, it turns out that because we are this hierarchy of many different control systems, we often those systems often want to control the same thing, but relative to different references. So we have internal conflicts. I want to go to the movies, but I have to go visit my sick mother. You can't be in two places at the same time. That's a conflict. So one of those things, that's a conflict. And when you have a conflict, and it doesn't stop, you have error. You have error in the system that wants to go to the movies, you have error in the system that wants to help your mom, and it hurts. And it's a loss of control. You are not able to do, those are two things you want to control, and you can't do it. So a the hierarchy of control systems explains why we have conflict. Conflict is unavoidable. We have conflicts, mini conflicts all the time during the day. But sometimes we have chronic, big-time conflicts, and that's when therapy is called for. Oh, I have a demonstration. So one more. So what I want you to do is to, this is another tracking thing, I want you to follow my finger with your one finger, these two. Okay, so track my two fingers with your one. Oh, you didn't conflict, you were good. Okay, often when I do that kind of demo, when I suddenly separate my fingers, your finger will actually be frozen for a while. It doesn't know whether to go that way or that way. You solve the conflict very quickly, so you're a very, very healthy person. So it's hard to demonstrate conflict because people don't like to be in conflict, and we'll generally resolve them really quick if they can't figure out a way. But persistent conflict is, okay, so there's two kinds of conflict. Intrapersonal, the kind where the control systems in conflict are inside you, or interpersonal, that's the kind of conflict that happens when you try to manipulate other people, when you try to control other people without their consent. There actually turns out to be many situations where we allow ourselves to be controlled consensually, because we know we're willing to do that. If you've ever played in a band or an orchestra, somebody's a leader and they say, you do this and you do that. They are controlling you. They're telling you what to do. You are agreeing to it. That's called cooperation. But some people are into arbitrary control or coercive control, and that's when you get into trouble. And that's interpersonal conflict means control between two different people, and that's very hard to resolve because the control systems are two different people, and so even if you are willing to give up, the other person might not. So that's it. Just the last topic here, the last thing. Do we have any time left?
Just enough, maybe 2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay. The last thing I'll mention is that perceptual control theory does assume that we have a mechanism in us to resolve conflict and to improve our ability to control. It's called a reorganization system, and it's a system in our nervous system that sits outside of our control hierarchy, and when something in this hierarchy goes wrong and there's error, this monitoring system detects it and starts throwing switches, trying to make things better, and when things get better, it stops throwing switches. But this reorganization system is the learning system. It's the system that we assume you are tapping into when you give people therapy. You're trying to get people to reorganize the way they're doing their controlling. But obviously I'm running out of time, so one last slide for the benefit of this group. I believe your group is called now Choice Theory. I just wanted to talk about how controlling and control theory relates to choosing. We often think of choosing as a good thing, but in control theory, when you feel like you're having to make a choice, that's actually a sign that you're in a conflict. When you feel like you have to decide, that's a conflict. What's good is to have options. It's good to have options. In order to be in control, you have to have a lot of possibilities for what you do, because disturbances are unpredictable and you have to be able to possibly do many different things. But a control system doesn't work by choosing what to do. It doesn't make decisions about what to do. The output of a control system that brings your perception where you want, it's completely automatic. Okay? When you're in control, when things are good, when you're floating, when you're in, if you've ever had the experience of really being there and feeling really tight, in a good way, you are not feeling like you have to decide what to do. It's just happening. So, so choosing is not something that's it's part of controlling. The feeling of choosing or deciding or whatnot is a sign of conflict from a control theory perspective. So that's it. Here's some websites to go to get some more material on perceptual control theory, and so I hope disturbances come that are good and prevail and allow me to get out there to Slovenia, but if not, I hope I'm able to talk to you via this internets. Okay? All right, thanks.